All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today, we're going behind the scenes of the Blair Witch Project. Now, you probably know it as like this groundbreaking horror film, but we're not here to talk about, jump scares or anything like that. We're diving into the real-life drama that happened off-screen, the things you only hear like whispered about, at parties and stuff. So get ready for some serious aha moments.
Yeah, and it all starts with this brilliant but risky idea by the directors, Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick. They wanted to blur those lines between what is real and what's just a movie.
Right, okay,
Yeah.
So we're talking found footage style,
Yeah.
shaky cameras,
Yeah.
and the actors, they even use their real names. It's almost like they tricked the audience into thinking that it was real.
Exactly. And think about it. The actors agreed to use their real names. They thought that only a small part of all the footage they were shooting would actually end up in the movie. I mean, they ended up filming the whole movie that way. Talk about commitment to your art.
That's wild. And speaking of commitment, can we talk about the budget for a sec? I mean, $35,000 to make a movie that ends up grossing millions. That's insane.
It just shows how clever they were using what they had to make something totally new, right? A real underdog story, you could say. I mean, small budget, nobody knew the actors, and bam, massive success.
Yeah, except the success, it didn't go to everyone equally, right? Heather Donahue, the lead actress, she was living in her car while at the same time her face was on, movie posters all over the place.
And this is where things get really interesting. You have this huge financial success. But the actors themselves, they were having a hard time, right? And it shows you that power dynamic that can happen in Hollywood, where just because the film makes money, it doesn't mean the people who made it get a share.
Yeah, it almost feels exploitative, especially when you think about Artisan, the company that produced it. They basically told the actors, no interviews, no other jobs, all to keep up this idea that they had disappeared in the woods, just like in the film.
Definitely a calculated move. They figured the less people know about the actors, the more they'll believe it. But of course, there was a personal and professional cost for the actors.
And they weren't even allowed to tell people they were actors. I heard Joshua Leonard, they told him not to mention it if he got another acting job. That's crazy.
A perfect example of how trying to be authentic can hurt the people involved. They were silenced, right? Their side of the story never got told.
They were probably thinking, hey, we helped make this film a hit, right? We'll get something out of it.
Makes sense to think that, right? They were part of something totally new that changed horror movies forever. You'd think they'd get recognition and fair pay, right?
That wasn't how it went at all. They sent them a fruit basket as a thank you, while the movie is making over $100 million. Ouch.
Yeah, pretty symbolic, right? Like a tiny thank you while the big guys are cashing in.
And even 25 years later, they are still trying to get fair pay and recognition, especially with talk of a new version of the film coming out. Their story isn't over, and they're determined to be heard.
Makes you wonder, does time make their contribution less important, or does it make it stronger, right? Because it shows they had a lasting impact.
That's a good point. It goes beyond just the money. It's about acknowledging that they helped make something huge, a cultural phenomenon, right?
And the Blair Witch Project, it raises this question. What happens when a film blurs reality and fiction? And is it okay if it hurts the people involved?
Yeah, not an easy question to answer. One thing's for sure, it's not just some Hollywood story, right? It's a human story, and it's definitely not over yet.
Totally agree. We've just scratched the surface here. We need to talk about the emotional toll this took on the actors and how they coped after the Blair Witch Project became such a huge success. It's like, we can't forget, beyond the money, there's the human side of this whole thing. Michael C. Williams, in an interview not too long ago, actually said he felt ashamed that he let this all happen. And Joshua Leonard, he talked about feeling like a loser, even though, he was in one of the most successful independent films ever made.
That's really sad to hear. Can you imagine being part of something so big, so successful, but feeling like what you did didn't matter? Must have felt very lonely.
Yeah, they were young, right? Just starting out and suddenly caught up in this huge thing. It makes sense that they maybe didn't have the experience or the right people around them to handle it.
It makes you think if they had someone looking out for them, someone who knew the business, maybe things would be different, right?
Exactly right. Having someone in your corner who gets it, who understands contracts, publicity, all that, especially when you're new to the industry, it makes a world of difference.
And now with this new Blair Witch movie they're talking about, it just adds a whole other layer to this.
Definitely brings back all those questions about money and recognition, right? It's like the actors are saying, hey, remember us, we helped start this whole thing, and now there's a new movie, shouldn't we be part of it? Shouldn't we, benefit from it?
That's a really good point, and it goes beyond this one film. It's a bigger question about who owns the story, especially in a movie like this one, where so much came from the actors themselves. Their real lives almost became part of the movie, right?
You're right. It really challenges how we think about what it means to create something. Where do we draw the line? When does something stop being inspired by and become, taking advantage?
And all this talk about the actors, what about the directors? Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick, where do they fit into this whole thing? Did they get a better deal?
Yeah, people don't always think about that part of the story. They did get paid more than the actors, sure. But from what I've read, it wasn't some crazy amount of money that changed their lives. And once the movie became a hit, it sounds like the studio kind of pushed them aside a bit.
Really? So even the guys who came up with the idea for the Blair Witch Project didn't really cash in. That's surprising.
Yeah, it shows that even when you're the creative force, the money people, the business side, they can still have all the power, especially when a film takes off like that.
This whole story, it's like a warning sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
It shows the downsides, even when things are successful in Hollywood. Everyone wants a piece of the pie, but sometimes the people who baked it don't even get a slice.
Yeah, the Blair Witch Project is a perfect example of that. And it shows that whole mix of art and money, reality and make-believe, they're not always separate.
And sometimes blurring those lines can hurt people.
Absolutely. The filmmakers, they tapped into something real, something scary and disturbing that really got to people. But trying to make it so real, it came with a price for the actors. They were living the story they were filming.
It's like the movie. It became a curse for them, in a way. This thing that made them famous, but also brought them a lot of pain and frustration.
That's a really interesting way to put it. The Blair Witch Project, it's not just a movie, it's something that affected the people who made it in ways nobody could have predicted.
It really makes you think about what it cost to create a phenomenon like that, the real cost. But before we finish up their story, let's see what happened to them after things calmed down. Did they ever find some peace, some closure?
That's the next part of the story we need to explore. Because their story, it's connected to the success of the Blair Witch Project, sure, but it's also about how they kept going, how they dealt with the craziness of the film industry as individuals.
Let's start with Heather Donahue. She stopped acting, didn't she?
Yeah, after the Blair Witch Project, she kept getting offered the same kind of roles, more horror films. But she wanted to try different things, to challenge herself as an actor.
So what did she end up doing?
Well, she decided to leave Hollywood. She moved to Northern California, and get this, she started growing medical marijuana.
Wow, that's a big change. What made her do that?
It was a choice. She wanted to get away from being the Blair Witch girl to have a normal life, away from all the pressure of Hollywood.
Yeah, I can see why she'd want that. Did she ever go back to acting?
She did a few smaller projects, but she found a new passion, writing. In 2011, she published her memoir called Grow Girl about her experiences with, the medical marijuana business, and it became a bestseller.
That's awesome. She found success on her own terms, outside of Hollywood.
Exactly. It shows how strong she is, how willing she was to change and try new things. She didn't let what happened define her. She made her own way and found success in a way nobody expected.
What about Michael C. Williams? What happened to him after the Blair Witch Project?
He kept acting, but he also started working behind the camera. He became a pretty successful sound editor, working on films like The Manchurian Candidate and Black Swan.
So he stayed in the industry, but in a different way. It seems like the Blair Witch thing didn't make him give up on filmmaking altogether.
Yeah, I think he found a way to use his creativity in a different part of the industry, maybe a part that felt more stable, where he had more control.
That makes sense. And finally, Joshua Leonard. He's still acting, right?
Yep, Leonard's had a good career. He was in films like Hump Day, The Lie, and Beatrice at Dinner. He's also directed some projects, and he's even involved in the music world.
Wow, a real multi-talented guy.
Yeah.
He seems to have really embraced being an independent artist, working on all kinds of different projects and exploring different creative paths.
It's fascinating, right? How each of them took a totally different path after the Blair Witch Project. It shows how many choices artists have and how important it is to find what really makes you happy, even if it means leaving Hollywood behind.
And in a way, what they did, it kind of reflects the movie itself, right? That idea of making your own way, going into the unknown, and finding success in ways you didn't expect.
I like that connection. It shows how powerful and lasting the impact of the Blair Witch Project is. It's a film that inspires us, not just as an audience, but as individuals, to find our own way in the world.
That's a great way to put it. So as we wrap up this part of the deep dive, what should our listeners take away from all this? What should they be thinking about, even after they're done listening to this?
I think if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture of the Blair Witch Project, it's a warning, sure, but it also reminds us that even in the tough, complicated world of show business, you can find your own voice, your own definition of success, and create something truly meaningful.
Well said. And it makes you think, could the Blair Witch Project have been so successful without pushing the limits, without blurring those lines between reality and fiction, even if it meant some tough consequences for the people involved?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. But it starts a conversation about how we make movies, the power of stories, and how important it is to treat everyone who works on a project fairly.
And that's a conversation worth having. Thanks for joining me on this really interesting deep dive. You know, it's amazing how all three actors, they each went in such different directions after the Blair Witch Project. Heather Donahue, looking for peace and a new way to be creative. Michael C. Williams, going behind the scenes. And Joshua Leonard, still acting and exploring other kinds of art. It really shows you there's no one right way to make a career in this business, right?
It's really how they dealt with everything that happened that stands out, you know? It would have been so easy to get cynical or bitter right after what they went through. But each of them, they chose their own path. They showed how strong they were and how dedicated they are to their art.
It's almost like they took that main idea of the film, facing the unknown, and applied it to their own lives.
Yeah, I get that. They were thrown into this crazy situation, just like the characters in the movie, and they had to find their own way out, make choices that shaped who they became.
And their stories, they remind us that you have to figure out who you are, what you want, especially in Hollywood, where everyone wants to put you in a box.
For sure. Success isn't just about being famous or rich. It's about finding what makes you happy.
So, the Blair Witch Project, it's a cautionary tale, yeah, but it also shows that even when things go wrong, even when it's tough, you can still take control of your story and find your own way to success.
And what happened to them, it's still relevant today, right? I mean, the whole entertainment industry is trying to figure out how to pay people fairly, who gets to control creative projects, and how technology changes how we tell stories.
And with this new Blair Witch movie they're talking about, well, the conversation about what happened to them, it's not going away anytime soon. It'll be interesting to see if the new film, if it learns from what happened with the original.
Yeah, will the people making it, will they do things differently, make sure everyone who works on it gets treated fairly, gets their share?
That's what I hope, that their story makes a difference. Helps change things for the better in the industry.
The Blair Witch Project changed everything, not just horror movies, but how we think about filmmaking now that we're in the digital age, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we've seen, the story behind the film, it's just as fascinating as the film itself.
It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? This whole deep dive into art, money, and what it means to be human. And for anyone listening, I think the thing to remember is this. When you watch the Blair Witch Project, keep in mind, the story doesn't end when the credits roll.
Exactly. The story keeps going. It makes us question things, think about what we've seen, and how the things we create, how they affect the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for coming along on this journey with us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep looking for those aha moments.